I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and here are your data points. Today, we are discussing digital health and the development of the AI lawyer toolset. If you are looking to learn what it means to be an AI lawyer, you've come to the right place. But it's no easy task. AI implicates so many areas of law that AI lawyers seemingly need to know it all. That's the challenge that we face. The opportunity, though, is really exciting, especially for those who love to learn new areas of legal practice. And to help, the Data Chronicles has set up this series of episodes to help lawyers build out their AI legal skill sets. We'll be covering a host of legal disciplines, everything from IP to antitrust to cybersecurity and so on. But an important area for today's conversation is digital health. To discuss, I've invited my partner, Melissa Bianchi, to the podcast. Melissa is a chair of our digital health working group and maintains a vibrant practice at the intersection of health and privacy law. Melissa, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Scott.
Melissa, maybe we can start just at a very high level and define digital health for me. I've heard many definitions of that term, and in some ways it has a large and very specific meaning. So I'm interested in your perspective on that, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that's developing in the AI space.
Sure. So, I think you're exactly right to ask the question and to note that it's a pretty broad concept, right? And I think if you ask 10 people what digital health is, you'll probably get 10 different answers because it really is such an array of tools and technologies, and it covers so much of the healthcare landscape. So we have mobile apps, we have wearable sensors, we have digital therapeutics. Those are individualized therapeutics that might be digital apps for the treatment of substance abuse disorder, for ADHD. And we have standalone software. So digital health really means the whole range of tools in the healthcare space, that people use to improve healthcare, improve learning about healthcare, improve efficiency of healthcare. So it's a pretty broad range of technologies.
Yeah, maybe if I'm thinking about it right, I think there's probably not an organization who is in healthcare or life sciences who is not also at some level a digital health company today. And there are probably many companies who don't see their primary business in health and life sciences, but are still offering a number of products that are used in healthcare and life sciences, and they are digital health companies as well.
I think that's right. Some of the companies that would just think of themselves as digital health companies, probably at their core, medical device companies or technology companies that offer a mobile app or a wearable sensor, right? A lot of us wear watches that track our fitness, but also maybe our blood ox or our heart rates, right? There's so many simple tools out there that are digital health that we use as consumers day in and day out. But really every company that is in the healthcare space has a digital health component at this point.
Right. So obviously what's driving that is the proliferation of all of the data relating to our day-to-day activities, whether that's sensor-based or data that's being collected through other types of technology, many of which kind of monitors aspects that relate to our health, our physical fitness, our health-related statistics. All of that is out there. And interestingly, at least from my experience, is that with all of this data has become great opportunities for technological advancement and for developments of new healthcare related treatments and therapeutics. And AI in that has always had a role. In fact, I would say that healthcare has really been an early adopter of artificial intelligence, even if we're not talking about generative AI in the way that many people refer to that term today.
I think that's right. I think as we talk about AI with digital health companies, sometimes folks are kind of surprised to hear that maybe we're just talking about what we've been talking about for years, right? That a lot of these technologies have been using machine learning and some type of algorithm for a long time. And some medical disciplines in particular, I think, have a really robust AI footprint. And ophthalmology, for example, I think that's a space where we have seen a lot of innovation and reliance on AI. We see companies able to use AI tools to identify, diabetic retinopathy through machine learning derived software. And we really can use that kind of machine learning to diagnose disease. FDA not long ago approved an AI algorithm that evaluates the severity of depression and anxiety. And so it's a really exciting set of opportunities. But I think while we talk about AI as maybe novel, I think for a lot of these companies, it's not. There are new innovations and new things we can do the better we get at these algorithms. But I think for a lot of companies, it is what they've been working at for some time in the healthcare space.
Yeah. And even though many have been at it for some time, it's also the case that I think many people have been struggling with it for a very long time because of the level of regulation and complexity within the healthcare system, especially in the United States healthcare system. I mean, I'm not sure that there is a more regulated space or industry or sector in the world than the US healthcare system. And that level of complexity is frankly what I find exciting and challenging at the same time, and what draws me to interest in the space and my work in the space. But I think what is also true about this is that for privacy lawyers, like the two of us, one of the probably a baseline principle is the more sensitive the data, the more complicated the issues are. And I think that is really the case for the way that digital health in particular is regulated, because there are just so many different legal issues, and AI just makes each one of those legal issues more complicated.
I think that's exactly right. I think in some ways for digital health companies, the AI world should feel somewhat familiar, right? I think it's life sciences companies, healthcare companies are so heavily regulated and are used to being so heavily regulated in the US. And so I think are really well positioned to take on AI regulation. Think about all the things you might think about as a privacy lawyer in a digital health company. If you take all of those factors, what kind of data are you using? Where are you collecting it? What kind of permissions do you have? Are you covered by HIPAA? Are you not covered by HIPAA? What do the state privacy laws look like to you? And so on and so forth. If you think about all of those issues, you already know those, right? You have someone in your organization who's asking those questions. They're not easy questions and they're not easy answers. But you have the basic tools from the work you've been doing for some time in the digital health space. You're used to being heavily regulated. I think what AI brings is just another level to that. There's just the volume of data that you may need to support an AI tool is maybe much greater than what you've been used to. And so considering those types of questions, are we getting all of that data permissibly? How do we get it? Can we use anonymized or de-identified data? What are the kind of things that we should be thinking about that might make this a bigger question, but maybe a similar question? And then I think there are the questions that are really somewhat familiar, but more complex. It's a really different outcome to have something go wrong with data and have a data breach than it is to have something go wrong with data where it's an algorithm that really informs the dose of a medication someone gets, or whether it's the right drug for someone at all, or really any of the AI tools that are so increasingly important in helping physicians be informed. And so we're used to that in some ways. Product liability, there's lots. I think medical device companies are used to that space, but I think AI adds another level to it. Because, human error is possible, but so is machine error. And I think those vulnerabilities are different for many folks who've been in the privacy space. And then you also have to think about things like bias. What are these algorithms producing, and where is the underlying data come from, and what safeguards have we put in place to address bias, and how do we do that? It's add level of complexity.
I mean, your point about, hey, let's take a step back and think about harm here. Like the digital health space in particular, getting this wrong could end up having much more significant risk than kind of any of the data lawyers typically think about. And I think that point is really an important overhang to this entire conversation. Interested in your perspective, because you've been naming hey, there are all of these various ways where this regulatory environment, it currently exists and where it will change for AI. But in the data world, and probably many of our listeners would be familiar with the cliche that we have a patchwork of privacy laws here in the United States. And I think if I think about that, it's actually there's probably a unique patchwork of health oriented laws that would apply uniquely into the digital health space. Maybe you can just kind of help me understand where all of these regulations, where all of this attention is from the number of regulators that we have in the United States and who is leaning into this space.
Sure. So look, a lot of the regulators are the ones that you know today, right? And you have a lot of the same issues as we've been talking about, right? There's privacy. You need to deal with the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Health and Human Services. You have state AGs. You have the usual patchwork, right, that we're used to in the US of the state and federal, and really in the data space and different types of data being regulated differently. So we're used to all of that. And I think in the digital health space, companies are also used to asking questions like, should this digital health tool be regulated as a medical device? And, that's could be the subject of many podcasts, right? And will it be used for a clinical trial? Do we need to think about human subjects research questions? Is it a tool that's going to be used to inform patient care? We've talked a little bit about that, about how a lot of algorithms really are used to inform physicians. There are a lot of easier ones, right? Is it going to improve some of the frustration providers and patients have in healthcare, like the scheduling issues or the endless forms, right, that have to be filled out on both by doctors and patients? Some of that's going to be easier, right? And probably be a medical device. It's not going to have as many implications for patient care and so forth. But, I think so. It's privacy, it's FDA regulation, and, there's IP, there's product liability. And then there are all the AI specific type considerations, algorithmic bias, fairness. Can that bias cause discrimination? And so we see a lot of regulators in the AI space in particular over that layer that you're used to probably for privacy. And so the Department of Health and Human Services, you're probably aware that the Biden administration issued an executive order on AI last fall. And the Department of Health and Human Services, all agencies have been mandated to do something, but in the health space, it's HHS. Each part of HHS is rolling out different initiatives. And so as a digital health company, you really have to be aware of those and figure out what applies to you. FDA, because they're so used to approving algorithms and these types of things, and they've really taken it to that next step. Understanding what their expectations are with respect to AI is important. But also within HHS, the Office of the National Coordinator, for example, has issued rulemaking, and understanding where you fit in that ecosystem is going to be really important to understanding what regulations apply.
Yeah, it's almost like, Melissa, if I think about it, what's unique about this particular space is that we don't have these comprehensive, sole source, look at this particular manual and you know all the rules. We have a number of those manuals, and each one have very complicated definitions at the outset that describe when is it applies and when it doesn't apply. If I'm thinking about when is it that you're a medical device, that would be an example of definitionally, we'd have to go back and start with the basics. When are you subject to HIPAA? When are you not subject to HIPAA? When does the HIPAA exception apply in the various state laws that are emerging? When doesn't it? It's almost like a very specific path that needs to go down to be able to try to understand what are even the rules that apply to me in this particular space, because it's not even obvious that those rules are well understood. That is almost something I think people take for granted, especially if they come from different legal disciplines that are not accustomed to the way that US health and health tech work under the various kind of considerations that apply. And then I think about it from another level. And, you were mentioning the various things. And one of the things that came to my mind was around cyber and the unique components that cyber security considerations have with this space, because obviously the protection of the information is important. The breach of it would be significant impacts. But let's just put those two things aside and then say, well, what about the loss of the availability of the data? What about the loss of the integrity of the data? And, both of which could end up having, again, back to your original point, life and death decisions. If I'm at an emergency room and I'm doing a surgery and all of a sudden the blood type is wrong and I, give an infusion of the wrong blood, we're talking about significant issues. And And I think that analysis around trying to go to figure out how to weave through all of these different considerations will continue to be probably the source of the most amount of attention for folks who are entering in or learning about how AI is impacting this space.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Look, back to the patchwork point, right? This is an even more complicated patchwork. You're used to a patchwork if you've been working digital health, but this is just more complex because you are laying over all the things you already are trying to deal with, this additional complexity. And we have a lot of legislators interested in regulating this space, trying to figure out how to regulate this space. And so you have to build a program internally that accounts for what you know and what you think might be coming. And that's a really hard thing to do. How do you pull together what you know? There's a checklist. Maybe you could figure out, okay, we're not subject to the new ONC rule. We're not developing a tool that is designed to sit in front of providers and say, hey, treat these patients or don't. That rule is really focused on making sure that the doctors understand what went into that tool and that they really have transparency about what is informing the information in front of them. But if you're not operating in that space, cross it off your list, right? And, you could do some of that and just eliminate things you're not subject to, the HIPAA space, the not HIPAA space, not always easy, but hopefully sortable. And then you still have to build for a regulation that's yet to come. And we've been doing a lot of this thinking with companies, particularly companies who are operating in the EU and in the US, because there's this huge new EU AI Act that'll be finalized in the next few weeks. And so if you have an AI technology and you're offering it in the EU and you're offering it in the US, how do you sort of, as one colleague said in a conversation the other day, measure twice and cut once? Right? How do you think through how to build a program based on what you do know about what US laws are in place, what the EU AI Act implications are going to be, but know that there's a lot more coming in the US. We have Colorado now. We have a lot of talk. We have a lot of among legislators at the state and federal level about regulating AI, but we don't quite know where they're going to go with that. And then we have a lot of guidance from HHS and a lot more guidance coming. So I think it's one of the challenges as a lawyer who's working with digital health tools is to know the existing patchwork and then to try to make your best educated guess as to how to build a compliance program based on all these sort of different and really rapidly evolving regimes.
I mean, it's a really good point, and I think one that I want to pause on because I think there's so much, call it noise out there, right, in terms of guidance by this agency and that agency, this executive order, who is asking, all of these other agencies to produce their forms of guidance. Obviously, industry has their own guidance and NIST has their guidance. We're seeing these laws pop up and all of these other things. We have state laws. And it's just like, what do I do with all of this swirl, all of this feeling, this mess? I mean, and you were talking about like, hey, at some point you're trying to prognosticate about what does the future of the space look like and trying to sort through these many different voices in the room, interested in where you feel like that may come out, or maybe just creating some sort of a rubric for individuals who are being asked to play this a really important role, but frankly are not well guided where to start.
Look, there's no easy answer. And that's a lot of what we've been doing is working through that with companies and trying to come up with some logical paths that seem likely to be the most efficient, right? So for example, in the medical device space, if you know you're going to go through FDA regulation, and get approval process, which not all devices are going to be regulated as devices, right, by FDA, and you're going to be operating in the EU, can you plan for those processes together to understand what terminology is probably going to apply to you in the EU, and how can you build your US device approval process to align with that in a way that aligns both with FDA expectations and EU expectations, and really understand the laws in both places and try to build something that's at least, it's not going to be perfect. There will need to be adjustments and adaptations for each jurisdiction probably in which you're operating, but what are the synergies? Where are the similarities? And how can you build, a research and a clinical trial process that is mindful of all of those requirements and where there are synergies so that you're not getting to the end of the line and saying, oh no, what do we do now? And so I think we look for those synergies in the way that we've been doing data protection for a long time, right? Where does the GDPR match up to some of the US laws, and where are the variances where we need to really build out different compliance programs? So I think we're seeing companies do a lot of that thinking and looking at the legislations being considered in the US, certainly look to Colorado, and to what the agencies are doing within HHS, and try to map a plan that's both helps you in the present day and that you're ready to adjust as we know more. And that's really the challenge that I think lawyers working with digital health companies, in-house are faced with. And doing this in the context of all this new AI, like we're supposed to have an AI governance policy, and we're supposed to have, first of all, even know what AI tools are coming through the company. How do we create a process and a committee to consider those issues? So we're seeing folks put in place governance processes and also really try to inform some of the product development processes based on what we know now, so that you'll be in the best position you can be, an informed position at least, as new regulations come out.
I mean, that's a really interesting point, Melissa. And I think another one that is a consistent theme that has come out of these episodes as we've explored what does it mean to develop an AI legal skill set? And in particular, what does it mean to be an AI lawyer? And I think what that theme is that AI law, to borrow a sports analogy, is not an individual sport. It's not golf. It's not even a double sport, for tennis. It is really a team sport because it requires the expertise of so many different stakeholders. What do you see the needed stakeholder in digital health? I mean, in other words, who has to come to the table when it is you're thinking about the deployment and application of artificial intelligence in connection with new or existing digital health tools?
Well, I think that probably a lot of the same people that would have had to come to the table before we were talking about AI all the time, right? So you certainly, if you're in-house, you certainly need your business team. You need to understand what they're doing and what they want to do. Like, what are their hopes and dreams for the next few years, and what are they already using? So it's a little bit of a mapping exercise to understand what's already happening in your company. If you're in healthcare, there's probably a lot happening in the company, a lot of great ideas folks have about how to make processes more efficient, how to make research better, faster, and more effective. So doing some mapping and figuring out what's happening within the companies and doing some training. Make sure folks know, when to come to you, what to ask you about, when to tell you they're thinking about AI. And so doing some of that mapping and having those conversations within the company can help folks come to their lawyers in-house when they're considering an AI tool. And it's not unlike what we were doing with privacy many years ago, just trying to create an awareness and make sure everyone's, at the table and educated so that they can really move the company forward in the best way. And the business teams need to be at the table because they're the ones really generating the product development ideas and figuring out where they think there's some really exciting opportunities. And also sorting, what are the exciting opportunities and what are just the fun things that we can all do with AI, right? And so trying to understand the difference. Somebody's got to make that decision, probably not the lawyers, right? And then figure out what products you really need to carry out an assessment on. What kinds of tools are you using internally? And what kind of new products are people looking to develop? Do you have a mobile app, for example, as a pharmaceutical company that folks enrolled in your patient support program are using? Is there an algorithm that maybe a vendor is proposing that would really make the ways in which you interact with patients much more effective, much more positive experience for the patient? Just making sure that you have the right permissions in place, that you're using the tool, understanding the tool, and that you've assessed it from a data privacy perspective, from a bias perspective, all those types of things that you would ask in any event, kind of with the AI features layered on. So understanding where folks are doing it, assessing the tools that seem most critical to the business, maybe the tools that seem highest risk. And I see a lot of companies establishing a governance committee to sort this out, to figure out what's the best way within our company to make sure that we're getting this right, that we're protecting the company from a compliance perspective, and that we're generating the technologies that we want to generate. And so having a governance committee and to set up some initial policies and such is a helpful step that I see a lot of companies take, so that there are folks around the table from the clinical development perspective, from the commercial perspective, from the legal perspective. IT, of course, is key to make sure that everyone's building it together.
Yeah. And I think, those business and operational stakeholders, super important. And then I think the other thing that probably you better know better than most is the multidisciplinary approach that legal plays. Wearing your hat as one of the chairs of our digital health working group, and I don't remember how many years that's been in place, but it's been some time. And one of the reasons why that group has been so successful is that you have brought in the individuals from all different legal disciplines, whether it's litigation or IP or regulatory, whether that's the health regulatory and fraud and abuse, or whether it's health privacy or any number of the many issues that are kind of in between. And it just seems like that model that, you were thinking about way back when is really the same model that helps you solve digital health today. And also it's going to help you solve digital health AI in the future.
I think that's exactly right. It's a really cross-topic exercise, and it needs to be, and really crossing all the topics we've been talking about. Some of the skill sets often I find companies are tasking the privacy officer or the privacy team is leading it. But I think in a lot of ways, that's because that's the team that's used to dealing with the patchwork. But it's only the start. You really do need the folks who have that broader regulatory vision. You have to have licensing issues. A lot of healthcare companies may be working with vendors, so you want to make sure you get those contracts right, and that somebody's considering who owns the data that feeds in, because you probably, again, need a lot more data than you used to make it effective, and who owns the outputs. So there are IP considerations too. You really need the full array of legal topics that digital health companies have been thinking about for a long time, and I think are really well positioned to get what AI regulation is going to require.
Well, Melissa, this is fantastic. I really appreciate your insights and the many practice points that you provided to our audience. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
With that, I'm Scott Loughlin. This is the Data Chronicles, and those were your data points.